This is CJ Baker, and every day I've been listening to a different randomly generated album that appears in the book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. So this is my second week of doing it, and just like I did last week, I'm going to do another weekly recap video. So basically, it's going to be a compilation of the clips that I previously posted. But because I posted those as short and only had like a 3 minute time limit to work with, some of the reviews are going to be extended. So there'll be some, I guess you could say, bonus content. And then afterwards, I'll give my updated rankings from best to worst of all the albums I've listened to so far. So if you want me to keep making this content, please like and subscribe, and hopefully you enjoy. So today's randomly generated album is Yank by Drive Like Jehu, released in 1994. So this is another album I'm familiar with. I actually listened to it first time probably a couple of years ago as part of a 1994 deep dive. It's actually unfortunate that I didn't experience it in real time because the angsty teenager version of me probably would have really loved this album. It definitely has that emotional connection, like the lead singer, the way he screams, it's authentic. It's like he either needs a hug or therapy. And as a teenager, I could really relate to that. But even as a non angsty adult, I still like this album. And even though like it's not necessarily the most accessible album as far as songs go. There's not necessarily anything that you can sing in the shower, but I still really felt an emotional connection. And there are songs I really like on it. Like I really like the opening track. Here Comes the Rome Plows. Golden Brown is an excellent song. It goes hard. I also really like Super Unison, and there's really some like loud soft dynamics, and there's even some more tender vocals that add a different dynamic. So yeah, this is like an album that I really like, but it's also an album that I have to be in the right headspace for because, like I said, it is moody, it's a little bit disjointed, but if you're in the right mood for it, and I think it is the type of music that is very cathartic. So not just cathartic for the individuals making the music, it's a good way of letting your emotions out, but it's also as the listener. So if you're in the right headspace, in the right mood, it's definitely an album that could be an emotional outlet. But if you're not in the right mood, I can see where there could be a disconnect. And I can see how this could be a difficult listen for some as well. But if you're into post-hardcore and emo and like stuff like Fugazi, this would be right up your alley. If you hate that stuff, you're probably going to hate this as well. Like I said, I like it. I give it 4 stars. Today's randomly generated album is Juju by Siouxsie and the Banshees, released in 1981. So this is a goth album. I don't necessarily mind goth, but I never super got into it, even though I love The Cure. But that's kind of, at times, their sounds kind of, to me, is goth adjacent. Like they have the mood and the gloominess, but they don't necessarily have the same elements of some of the supernatural aspect of goth that I don't necessarily care for. As far as this album goes, I do like the album, but like I said, I'm not necessarily into the supernatural aspect. I'm not into the spooky wooky aspect. There's some aspects of this album that I kind of found theatrical a bit, but it's still a really solid album. Like there's some really catchy songs that you could bop to in the club if you're into that thing. Like, for example, I really enjoy the opening track Spellbound. Arabian Nights is a catchy little ditty as well. Monitor is probably my favorite song on the album. That's a solid song that really goes hard. It has a dark mood in the best possible way. So yeah, I do like that song. My least favorite track on the album is Voodoo Dolly, which I don't like at all. And that's what I mentioned. I don't really like the theatrical, and I don't really like the spooky wooky stuff. And just the whole vibe of the song, I just don't connect with it. So I really strongly dislike that song. And unfortunately, that does bring the rest of the album down a bit because it is the closing track. So the album might have done a little bit better if it was sequenced a bit different. But overall, it's a solid album. I enjoyed it. Some catchy tunes. So yeah, I gave the album 4 stars. So today's randomly generated album is A Hard Day's Night by the Beatles, released in 1964. So this is the early stages of the Beatles' career. So I would basically say this is like their boy band era. And personally, I actually prefer later on in their career where they started to expand their sound a bit and got a bit more experimental. But this is still an excellent album with some classic songs on it. So the first 7 tracks on the album appear in the movie of the same name. And there's also a US version. So the version that appears in the book is the UK version, but the US version also features the 7 tracks from the film. It also includes the song I'll Cry Instead, which appears on the UK version as well. So that song was recorded for the film, but didn't make the cut. And then the US version also includes 4 instrumental tracks arranged by George Martin. So as far as which version's better, it's probably all going to come down to the fact how you feel about the instrumental version, because the best 8 songs on both albums are the 8 songs that appear on both albums. So yeah, there's some classic Beatles material here, like the title track, A Hard Day's Night, which also features cowbell. You can never get enough cowbell. If I Fell is a beautiful, gorgeous tune. And I Love Her, also a beautiful, gorgeous tune. Can't Buy Me Love is catchy. We already mentioned I'll Cry Instead. So yeah, it's just an excellent album with some excellent songs. And even though, like I said, I do prefer the later period, and they would scale even loftier heights, this is still an important album in the development of the band. Like, for example, this is the first album that the Beatles recorded that featured all original material. So yeah, even though it's not necessarily my favorite Beatles album, it's still an excellent album with some classic songs. So yeah, I gave the album 4.5 stars. And also one shameless plug on my website, ongoinghistoryofprotestsongs.com. I actually have an article about the Beatles protest songs, which don't always get enough credit for the socially conscious material. So you can check out my website. And I also recorded a video version of that you can check out on the YouTube channel as well. So today's randomly generated album is Freak Out, the 1966 debut album by the Mothers of Invention. Featuring the demented genius of Frank Zappa, this concept album features not only just really crazy out there music, but it also features some insightful, satirical, social critiques as well. So compared to a lot of Zappa's work, lyrically it's actually fairly tame, because some of his stuff at times could border on being vulgar, where in this case it's more absurdist than anything else. I really enjoy the opening track, Hungry Freaks Daddies. That's like a very weird out there opener. Who Are the Brain Police is also really trippy. Enjoy that song. There's a couple of like really weird, quirky doo-wop tunes that I get a kick out of. My absolutely favorite song on the album, which is also a change in tone a bit because it's the most serious track on the album, is Trouble Every Day. So that song, it's a protest song written in response to the Watts riot that discusses racial inequality. So it definitely stood out with the civil rights movement that was going on. And that's the thing about Zappa. Even though at times he could be politically incorrect, he could also be incredibly woke at other times. And that's the thing with most humans, they contain multitudes. So, yeah, this album is definitely a fine showcase of like I said, the demented genius of Frank Zappa. And overall, like the entire band, there's a high level of musicianship. So they definitely do some, like music can get a bit weird and avant-garde, but in order to be able to do that, you kind of have to know what you're doing. So yeah, it's definitely a high level of musicianship there. So the other track I do just want to briefly comment on is the closing track, The Return of the Son of Monster Magnet. And this is a song I'm a bit on the fence of. I mean, I think if it's going to be on the album, it has to be the closing track because there's no way you can follow it up. The song's just totally bonkers and out there, which I appreciate. I like bonkers and out there. But yeah, it's over 12 minutes and it can be a bit much. So, like I said, that's one song on the album I'm a bit on the fence about. But thing I will say with the album is a little bit long, so that might be my one critique. Overall, it's an excellent album, potentially divisive album because it's not necessarily the most accessible. It can be a bit weird, but if you're into that type of thing, it's a work of genius. So yeah, excellent album. Give it 4.5 stars. So today's randomly selected album is Grace by Jeff Buckley, released in 1994. So years ago, the first couple of times I tried listening to this album, I had a tough time connecting with it. I did always think he obviously has a gorgeous haunted vocal delivery. I always loved his cover of Hallelujah, but just something about the rest of the album that there was a disconnect. And I think a lot of that is at the time I think I found some of the vocals almost to be a bit much or even a bit theatrical. But over the years, my assessment has definitely changed. So, for example, even the theatrics at one time, what I thought might have been a bug is actually a feature. And even that vocal range kind of stands out because it does kind of show the versatility in his vocals and even versatility musically, because there are all aspects of this album that do kind of fall in that like alternative rock lane. But there's also other elements as well. Like, for example, there's jazzy elements. One of Buckley's biggest vocal influences is Nina Simone, and you could definitely hear that influence in the album. And in connection with that, one of the songs that he covers is a gorgeous rendition of Lilac Ride, which Nina Simone also notably covered. So yeah, now I absolutely love the album, and there's many highlights. I really like the opening track, Mojo Pid. There's also Corpus Christi Carol, which shows off his gorgeous falsetto. So that gives a different dynamic to his vocals as well. Then there's Lover You Should Come Over, which is a decent tune. And I was actually surprised to find out that is actually his most streamed song on Spotify. I always assumed that would be Hallelujah. But now let's talk about Hallelujah, the absolute highlight of the album. So it's a cover, of course, of Leonard Cohen, but he also based his arrangement on John Cale's cover. So it's technically a cover of a cover, but this is by far the definitive version. And once Buckley recorded the perfect version, there should have been some law outlawing anyone else covering it ever again. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's been the odd, half decent version of it, but most of the covers are absolute trash. And don't even get me started on reality shows contestants butchering that tune. It's like absolutely horrendous. But yeah, getting back on track. Love this album. Absolutely gorgeous. 4.5 stars. So today's randomly generated album is Aha Shake Heartbreak by Kings of Leon. So released in 2004. This is their sophomore album. And I don't necessarily mind Kings of Leon, but they actually do have one of my least favorite songs of all time. The song Use Somebody. I just have an irrational hatred for that song. And because of that, I mean, thankfully it doesn't appear on this album, but every time I hear a Kings of Leon song, I get painful flashbacks of that song as well. Like there's PTSD going on. So yeah, and also concerning Kings of Leon, apparently, like there's been a number of different editions of the book, like 1,001 albums you must hear before you die, and they have a total of 3 albums that has appeared in at least one of the editions. Apparently, with the most recent revision, they now have 0. But yeah, it just kind of boggles my mind how bad, like Kings of Leon, could have 3 albums that are considered essential and important. Because to me, they're the epitome of a generic indie rock band. But yeah, I guess I should specifically discuss this album. And that's my issue with this album too. I don't hate the album, but it's the epitome of a generic indie rock album. So the album's just kind of okay. There's songs I like King of the Rodeo is kind of a bop. Taper Jean Girl, yeah, it's kind of catchy. Don't mind the bucket. So there's some decent tunes and nothing that's necessarily terrible, but there's also nothing that's particularly noteworthy either. Like I said, just generic, just kind of there. So we don't have anything much else to say about it. So yeah, I'll give the album 3 stars. It might even lose a half a star because I hate the song You Somebody. You Somebody. Yeah, I hate that song. I could use somebody, somebody like you. Yeah, kick that song out of my head. So yeah, I hate Kings of Leon for that. Today's randomly generated album is Selling England by the Pound by Genesis, released in 1973. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not really a prog fan. This is Peter Gabriel era Genesis. And I do prefer Peter Gabriel era prog rock Genesis actually over Phil Collins being the lead single, mainstream radio friendly Genesis. But that being said, I'm just not really a fan of Genesis. But I am a fan of Peter Gabriel's solo. So we'll just get that out of the way. It's not my thing, but I do appreciate that both eras of Genesis were successful in different ways. So the prog era with Peter Gabriel was influential in the development of prog rock, and then the Phil Collins era, I don't think it was critically well received, but commercially they sold a lot of records, got a lot of radio airplay. But yeah, let's just focus on this album. So I actually don't hate the first 4 songs on the album. So they're easy enough to listen to. Always stand out as good or bad. But then where the album drops off the cliff for me is the 5th song, The Battle of Epping Forest. And the song's just it's like drumming and slog. It's meandering. It's artsy-fartsy. I just don't like it. It's ponderous. It's kind of very tedious to get through. And because of that, that's kind of like halfway through the album. That puts me in such a bad mood that it's kind of hard to focus on the rest of the album. So I kind of lose my focus and my interest. To be fair, I probably should try to re-listen to the album again, but I just don't want to. I'll acknowledge that this album is considered important in the development of prog rock. Like I said, I do love Peter Gabriel's solo. And as far as Phil Collins go, he has the odd song I like as far as Genesis, Phil Collins. I believe that Confusion is Genesis. I do like that song. My favorite solo Phil Collins song is In the Air Tonight. But otherwise, I'm just not a huge fan, and a lot of stuff's just smelchy to me. But yeah, we'll move on. I'll give it 3 stars. Apologize to the prog fans and the Genesis fans. I'm sorry and my condolences. This concludes the recap. So we now have my updated ratings. So my 1 and 2 album has stayed the same. The White Stripes Elephant, followed by Bob Dylan, Bringing It Back Home. So both of those were 5 stars, and there was no new 5-star albums this week. But the rest of the albums, so we now got a couple of albums from this week. We got Jeff Buckley's Grace, the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night. Then we got U2's Acting Baby, followed by REM's Green, and then the Mothers of Invention, Freak Out. So all those were 4.5 stars. And then at 4 stars, we got Elvis Costello, My Aim is True, Drive Like Jehu's Yank Crime, followed by Siouxsie and the Banshees, Juju. And then at 3.5 stars, we got Loretta Lynn, Don't Come Home a Drinking, with Lovin' on Your Mind. And then at 3 stars, we got the Rolling Stones Aftermath. So this is the UK edition that appears in the book. I actually would have had the US edition at 3.5 stars, and I would put the US edition ahead of Loretta Lynn, but it's the UK edition in the book. And then we got Aha, Shake, Heartbreak by Kings of Leon. And then my least favorite album is Genesis, Selling England by the Pound. So just like I asked last week, the question that we have to consider is, are these really albums that you must hear before you die? And the obvious answer is, of course, not, because that's an exaggeration, and you could live a perfectly happy life without listening to any of these albums. But basically, we can consider this list a list of essential albums that are important in the development of music, or at least that's how I view it. So, do these albums belong on this type of list? And I would say the only album that I might have a bit of an issue with is Aha, Shake, Heartbreak by Kings of Leon. So, as I mentioned in the video, I basically view this album as the epitome of a generic indie rock album. So, it's definitely not essential. I mean, even my least favorite album by Genesis, Selling England by the Pound, I can see the argument of why it'd be on the list because it is considered important in the development of prog rock. So just because I'm not particularly a fan of the album doesn't mean I can't acknowledge its merits. So yeah, Kings of Leon's probably the only one I might have a bit of an issue with. So now it's your turn to weigh in. What did you think of these albums? Do you think they deserve to make the list? Do you have a favorite? Do you have a least favorite? You can let me know in the comments. And if you want me to keep making content like this, please like and subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss any future videos. And you can also check out my website, Ongoing History of Protest Songs.com. Thanks for watching, and please stay safe.